On a quiet September afternoon, police unlocked the door to a luxury apartment after a worried mother begged them to check on her daughter just one more time. Just 48 hours earlier, nothing inside seemed out of place. There were no signs of forced entry and no obvious signs of a struggle. The police walked away believing that everything was fine. But when that door opened again, detectives were met with a crime scene so disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to make sense of what they were seeing inside of this refrigerator. A successful young woman had vanished after telling a friend that she was afraid of the man who had suddenly entered her life, and the evidence left behind would raise far more questions than answers. What happened inside of apartment 520? Why couldn't even the medical examiners determine exactly how she died? And how did a man that she'd only known for days become the center of one of Los Angeles' most haunting homicide investigations? This is the case of Maleesa Mooney. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. All right, friends, let's get started on today's case. Maleesa Marie Mooney was born on October 16, 1991 in Guyana, which is a country rich with beautiful rainforests. When Maleesa was around 6 years old, her family made the decision to emigrate to the United States, and they settled into Los Angeles, California. They landed in the Hyde Park neighborhood, which is south of LA, and life wasn't glamorous there, but it was home. This is where Maleesa grew up. She was the oldest daughter in her family, and she was known to be the one that held things together for her whole family. Her younger sister Jordan said that Maleesa taught her everything that she knew. She was her first best friend and the one who made her who she was. Maleesa was also a peacemaker and the backbone of her family, so she organized all of the family get-togethers, made sure that everyone ate, and opened her arms, even to people who, as her sister later put it, did not necessarily deserve her. She led with trust, and she was generous with her kindness. Maleesa was also very sharp and naturally intelligent. She was a licensed real estate agent with Nest Seekers International, which is a Beverly Hills-based luxury agency. Real estate is not an easy industry to break into, especially at the luxury level in California. It requires reading people very quickly, building rapport under pressure, and maintaining composure in negotiations, and Maleesa had all of those skills. She was also a model, or at least getting back into modeling. She had the look for it. She was striking, photogenic, and all of that translated well across the camera, but it wasn't her main focus. Her real estate career was the foundation that she was building, and modeling was just something that she enjoyed doing on the side. She had beauty and brains. By the summer of 2023, Maleesa Mooney was doing the thing that a lot of people dream about, and not everyone actually gets to do it. She was stepping into a new chapter. In early August of that same year, she moved into a brand new apartment, which was Unit 520 at Sky at Bunker Hill, which is a high-rise luxury residential building at 222 South Figueroa Street in downtown Los Angeles. She'd been in that new apartment barely a month when today's case takes place. The first week of September 2023 started normally for Maleesa. She was settling into her new apartment. She had her career and family who stayed in contact with her all of the time, as many close families do. And then, sometime in the first few days of that month, her world collided with a man named Magnus Humphrey. Their introduction happened through Maleesa's friend Kirsten Dossett. Humphrey had flown to Los Angeles to see his estranged brother, and that brother was friends with Kirsten. At some point in early September, the four of them, Maleesa, Kirsten, Magnus, and his brother, ended up together at a bar in Santa Monica Beach. That first night was wild and crazy. They partied together until early the next day, and the four of them used a substance that we will refer to today as Coca-Cola or Coke to continue the partying. Kirsten said that Magnus was using that on a daily basis throughout the time that she knew him, and at that time, it was a constant daily habit. But through the partying and that night, chemistry sparked between Maleesa and Magnus Humphrey. He was charming, attentive, and by the next day, he moved into her apartment on the 5th floor of Sky at Bunker Hill. So who was this stranger moving in the next day? Well, let's learn a little bit more about Humphrey. Magnus Daniel Humphrey was 41 years old, and he was from Hopkins, Minnesota. In September of 2023, Humphrey had traveled to Los Angeles to reconnect with his estranged brother, and he didn't have any plans of staying until Maleesa caught his eye. But Humphrey had a past. His criminal record was extensive, and it showed a disturbing pattern of behavior going back to at least 2003. So that's 20 years of crime that Maleesa was not aware of. In 2003, he was convicted for illegal possession of a firearm, so he already had that prior conviction that barred him from owning a gun, and he had one anyway. Then in 2009, he was convicted of second-degree assault and again for unlawful firearm possession. Court records actually show that he was also convicted in Illinois for charges that related to intimate assault and false imprisonment. It's safe to say that Maleesa knew none of this information during their whirlwind romance. His most recent major conviction was in 2016 when he was convicted of possession with intent to distribute substances. That was a federal charge, and it carried serious weight. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison plus 5 years of supervised release because of it. He was released and was actively serving that supervised release portion on federal probation in the fall of 2023. He was not supposed to be traveling out of state or using any kind of substances, so all his probation officer knew was that he was in Los Angeles at that time for a brief stay to go see his brother. Now, to get back to the couple, their relationship was intense and fast. Kirsten said that during the 5 days that she saw them together, the two of them were rarely more than a foot apart at any given moment. Magnus was already calling Maleesa his girl and his woman in front of other people, and he even went to a family barbecue with her. He also talked about marriage, which was very fast. Maleesa seemed at first to feel something real, and she even told her friend that she was going to marry him. For a woman who had always wanted family and marriage, a fast and intense connection like this would have seemed thrilling. Kirsten had never seen Maleesa get that close to a man that quickly before, so she was really hopeful that maybe this was real. But then Kirsten started to see something unfold that was making her feel very uneasy. Magnus Humphrey was not just attentive, he was territorial. And at one point during a night out, he physically threw his arm around Maleesa in a way that read as controlling, not affectionate, and he never let her out of his immediate sight. He also wasn't paying for anything, like drinks, groceries, or the substances that he was consuming daily at that point. Kirsten had told Maleesa to ask Magnus to buy her a $500 gift card to Best Buy just to gauge his financial situation, but Maleesa texted her back and said he doesn't have it. So now Maleesa was aware of his finances, and this is when things shifted between the couple. By September 7th, things had gotten even worse. Maleesa sent text to Kirsten saying that she wanted Magnus to leave and that she was scared of him. Her friend offered to call the building security to have him removed, but sadly that call was never made and we don't know why. After that text, she went completely silent. Maleesa's phone stopped delivering messages and her iCloud account triggered a security alert, suggesting that someone may have been attempting to access it. No one in her family or her friend circle had heard from her, and this wasn't like Maleesa. Remember, she was the family backbone and planner, so for her to go silent, especially with her mom, something was definitely wrong. On September 9th, Maleesa was supposed to go back to her old apartment to collect the rest of her belongings because her move actually wasn't quite finished yet, but she never showed up. Family and friends continued to reach out, and nothing was delivering, so everyone's concern was rapidly growing. Her cousin Bailey said, quote, "When a week went by, we just knew something was off. Her messages weren't delivering, and we knew something was up because we all have a special relationship with Maleesa," end quote. On Sunday, September 10th, Maleesa's sister contacted the Los Angeles Police Department Central Bureau, and she requested a welfare check on her sister. Officers responded and they went to the building, rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, then they knocked on the door of Unit 520. There was no answer. They checked for any visible sign of disturbance from the hallway to warrant going inside, but nothing seemed obviously wrong or out of place. There were no signs of forced entry, there was no weird sounds or smells, and it had only been 4 days since she had last been seen. Because of this, no one opened that door and they just left. They couldn't enter without cause. 2 more days passed. Then, on Tuesday, September 12, 2023, Maleesa's mom called the building manager directly and asked for another welfare check. The manager contacted the LAPD and the officers came back at 3:54 p.m., but this time, the manager was waiting with his master key, and this time, the door would be opened. The manager inserted his key and the door swung open, but the apartment was eerily still. Officers stepped inside and began moving through the unit, and they checked the living area and bedroom, but no Maleesa. Everything seemed to be perfectly in place. Then, one of the officers noticed something in the kitchen that stood out. Food was sitting on the counter. These were items that needed to be refrigerated, so it seemed that these were taken out and placed on the kitchen counter almost as if to make room for something else. An officer headed to the refrigerator, and as soon as he opened the door, he found Maleesa. She was wedged into the refrigerator, and her body was contorted to fit the space. Her head was upright, and her right arm was bent at the elbow, pressed up against her body, and both of her legs were bent at the knees, with her feet pushed into the corner of the unit. Blood had pooled beneath her, and it was visible from the bottom of the refrigerator on the inside. It had even seeped onto the kitchen floor beneath the fridge, too. But this wasn't visible to the officers until the refrigerator was moved, in case you're wondering why they didn't notice it sooner. Maleesa was not moving or breathing. They couldn't do anything to save her. She had been bound and gagged and folded up inside of a kitchen appliance as if her life meant nothing. Her fingerprints were run through the LAPD's live scan system on the morning of September 13th, and the body was formally identified as Maleesa Mooney. The identification was confirmed by the Department of Justice and the FBI within hours, and the family was immediately contacted. To say that Maleesa's family was devastated was an understatement. The heart of their family was gone, and in such a brutal, shocking way. At 7:22 that evening, Detective Gibson from the LAPD Homicide Division made the first call to the LA County Medical Examiner's office to report what they had just found, and the ME arrived by 2:40 that morning. Before we get into the autopsy, though, I want to talk a little bit more about their assessment of Maleesa before she was brought to the coroner's office. Maleesa was wearing a leopard print romper and blue underwear, and there was a pink sweatshirt that was partially found covering her head. An animal print dress had been found wrapped around both of her lower thighs, and her wrists were bound together with multiple items, including white phone charging cords, white shoelaces, and a black tank top. Her ankles were bound together with similar items, too. Those two sets of bindings had been tied together behind her back, pulling her into a hogtied position, and the black tank top was threaded between her two hands. A gray dress was wrapped once around her neck, in addition to 3 rags, a gold piece of clothing, and a pink vest. Part of that pink vest had been stuffed inside of her mouth 3 inches as a gag, which is just sickening to think about. The autopsy of Maleesa Mooney was performed on September 17th by 2 medical examiners, and the LAPD investigator was also present throughout the exam. One of the most important things to understand about Maleesa's autopsy is the cause and manner of death in this case. Normally, when a medical examiner completes an autopsy, they can identify a specific medical cause of death, but that isn't what happened here. Instead, the cause of death was just listed as homicidal violence. The medical examiners could not identify one single injury that by itself explains why Maleesa died. Maleesa suffered from multiple traumatic events, and while every injury contributed to understanding what she endured, none of them independently perfectly explained the exact moment or injury that took her life. Because of that, the medical examiners concluded that her death was unquestionably caused by another person's actions, but they couldn't narrow it down to exactly which one. Maleesa was described as well-developed and well-nourished. She was 31 years old and stood at 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing about 122 pounds. Because the killer placed Maleesa in the refrigerator, they actually helped preserve the injuries so that the MEs could get to the bottom of what happened to her, even if they couldn't pinpoint which injury took her life. One of the first medically significant observations that they found, though, involved her eyes. The report states that her conjunctiva were congested. The conjunctiva are thin, transparent membranes that line the inside of the eyelids and cover the white portion of the eyes. Under normal circumstances, the tiny blood vessels in these tissues are barely noticeable, but in Maleesa's case, they were swollen with blood. Let's think about circulation as a continuous loop for a minute. Blood leaves the heart through arteries, delivers oxygen to the tissues, and then returns back to the heart through veins. If something interferes with that process or that return, then blood will begin to back up wherever it's being blocked. It's very similar to a traffic jam. Cars continue entering the highway, but they can't move forward efficiently, so congestion develops behind the blockage. That same thing happens inside of the human body. When normal breathing becomes impaired or pressure inside of the chest and neck increases, blood returning from the head has a harder time draining back down toward the heart. The smallest veins and capillaries become engorged first because they're the most delicate parts of circulation. That's exactly what the medical examiner found in Maleesa. However, the report also mentioned something that many people look for in suspected strangulation cases. There were no petechial hemorrhages. If you remember from several other recent cases, these are tiny pinpoint spots of bleeding that occur when very small capillaries rupture. These capillary ruptures are not required to be present, though, when someone does die from a lack of oxygen. And this is something that the medical examiner specifically addressed in the report. As we touched on, at the scene, investigators found multiple pieces of clothing that were wrapped around Maleesa's neck. The MEs found that there was redness seen under those layers of clothing that is consistent with pressure and friction against the skin, but not deep compression or tight squeezing. If someone had been forcefully strangled by sustained pressure to the neck, then there would be bleeding found in the deeper muscles and connective tissues as well, but that wasn't present. This immediately made me wonder why. What was the killer's reason to wrap all of the additional clothing around her head and her neck? Let me know if how Maleesa was found leaves you with a lot more questions too. The injuries to her face painted a more clear picture though. Maleesa had a laceration above her left eyebrow, a bruise above her right eyebrow, an abrasion across the middle of her forehead, extensive bruising found to her right eye and extending down onto her cheek, along with bruises and scrapes around her lips. She had been brutally attacked. Lacerations are produced by blunt force, so when the skin is slammed against a hard bone underneath it, it literally splits apart. The eyebrow is one of the most common places that this happens because the skin lies directly over the bony ridge of the skull with very little cushioning underneath it. It still takes a forceful impact to create this type of injury, though. The bruise over the opposite eyebrow was a different point of impact. The abrasion across the forehead means that the skin was scraped by friction or contact with another surface, too. Then there's that large bruise that surrounded her right eye. This wound was 3 inches by 3 inches. Now, on paper, that may not sound very dramatic, but when you picture that on an adult woman's face, that takes up nearly the entire eye socket and most of the upper cheek. This was not a small black eye, and it took significant blunt force trauma to create it. The injuries around her mouth tell us that force was also directed towards her mouth and lower face, too. So, she had injuries to the left side of her forehead, the right side of her forehead, around her right eye, across the middle of her forehead, and around her mouth. That pattern tells us that she suffered from multiple impacts from different directions and at different times. The internal exam of her scalp showed consistent findings with that too. The medical examiner found hemorrhages under the left and right frontal scalp and in the back of her head. Despite sustaining multiple blows to the head, though, Maleesa had no skull fractures and no bleeding inside of the brain. So, while the head trauma clearly paints a picture of how long Maleesa suffered, it didn't cause a fatal brain injury. The injuries across her back tell us a different story, too. The report describes multiple horizontal, narrow bruises and abrasions running alongside one another, and these are called patterned injuries because they reflect the shape of whatever created those wounds. These may have come from repeated strikes from cords, cables, belts, or similar objects. I wondered if these injuries came from the same cords that were used to bind her, but we may find out more about that later on during trial. Maleesa also had a fractured 11th rib, and normally when someone fractures a rib while alive, surrounding blood vessels will rupture almost immediately. This is called a vital reaction because living tissue responds to an injury with bleeding and inflammation. However, there was no hemorrhage found around this fracture. That means that the injury likely occurred extremely close to the time of death or after circulation had already stopped, meaning that she had already passed away. Now, when it comes to the marks found on her wrists and ankles, the grooves left behind by the bindings were obvious to the naked eye. But when the pathologist dissected beneath those marks, they found no internal bruising. Again, this comes back to vital reaction, which we just talked about. Imagine placing a tight tourniquet around someone's arm while they're alive. The pressure compresses the tiny blood vessels, and because blood is still circulating under pressure, some of those vessels leak into the surrounding tissue, creating bruising beneath the skin. That didn't happen to Maleesa. The ME specifically stated that there was no evidence that the bindings were applied to Maleesa while she was alive and capable of producing that response. Again, this means that she was bound either while she was dying or after she had already died. Now, to get into the toxicology report, the lab did detect the chemical breakdown of Coca-Cola in her blood, which confirmed that she had been using it recently, even though it had already been metabolized. Another metabolite was present that can only form when coke and alcohol are present in the body at the same time. So, this confirms that both substances had been used together before her death, but not in lethal amounts. Maleesa's blood alcohol level was about 0.06%, which would only be considered mild intoxication. So, neither the alcohol or drugs could explain her death. So, altogether, the autopsy confirmed that Maleesa was repeatedly beaten. She sustained gruesome injuries, then she was gagged, had clothing wrapped around her face and neck, and then she was found bound inside of that refrigerator. The medical examiners believed that she most likely died from homicidal asphyxia, meaning someone else's actions prevented her body from getting enough oxygen. But was it the gag? Was it restricted chest movement? Was it her body position? Or was it several of those factors together? The autopsy couldn't answer that question. So, instead of speculating, the medical examiners chose the most accurate conclusion supported by all the other evidence, which was simply homicidal violence. Now, to go back to the crime scene investigation, the forensic technicians logged all of the clothing and physical items that were found on scene, and they performed a non consensual intimacy kit, if you know what I mean. I'm censoring the wording on that a bit, but I know you'll understand what I'm referring to. This kit documents swabs that were collected from her neck, chest, inner thighs, private areas, both internal and external, cervix, and more. We're going to circle back to this towards the end of the video, though. During their continued search for evidence, they also found that Maleesa had on a maxi pad with visible blood and fecal matter on it. And this stood out to me because Maleesa's family had actually shared that she was 2 months pregnant when she had her life taken from her. There was no mention of her pregnancy in the autopsy, and there were mixed reports from news outlets as to whether or not she was pregnant too. The fact that Maleesa was wearing a pad, though, while newly pregnant made me wonder if, unfortunately, maybe something went wrong with her pregnancy, but I couldn't get that fact straightened out. Otherwise, I would have definitely clarified it for you guys. I am hopeful that this is going to be addressed during the trial, though. Next, the investigators took a look at the apartment building's CCTV footage to try to piece together who had been in Maleesa's apartment, and this is where the lead finally started to come in. Thankfully, the building's key fob controlled elevator system tracked every entry and exit through the main elevator. From that footage, investigators put together the following timeline. On September 5th, 2023, the cameras captured Maleesa, another female, and a male entering the elevator and going up to the 5th floor. This was the night that Maleesa and Humphrey first went back to her apartment together after they met at that Santa Monica Beach bar. On September 6th, Maleesa was seen in the elevator in the afternoon headed down to the parking garage. Her car actually had a parking ticket on it, so that was also date and time stamped with her whereabouts, but this is the last time that Maleesa Mooney was ever seen alive on camera. The next day, on September 7th, an unidentified male was captured on surveillance using Maleesa's key fob to use the elevator. He was carrying plastic bags, went up to the 5th floor, and on that same day, Maleesa was texting Kirsten Dossett telling her that she was scared and she wanted Magnus Humphrey to leave. Between September 9th and 12th, there was no footage of Maleesa, and her phone activity had completely stopped by that point too. This is when the police came in for that wellness check and discovered what happened to her. About 2 months after Maleesa was found, on November 3rd, 2023, officers from the Hopkins Police Department in Minnesota stopped Magnus Humphrey at the corner of 5th Avenue and Excelsior for an equipment violation on his car. He was arrested on the spot because he had weed and an open container of alcohol in the vehicle as he was driving. When he was being processed, another flag came up, though. He was in violation of his federal probation. The U.S. Marshal Service got involved, and Humphrey was eventually transported to a federal facility in Chicago. On February 1st, 2024, so 5 months after the discovery of Maleesa's body, the LAPD announced that they had finally identified Magnus Daniel Humphrey as the suspect responsible for her murder. The LA County District Attorney's Office confirmed that charges had been filed for 1 count of murder and 1 count of torture, and thankfully, he was already in custody, so this made the process fairly smooth for the LAPD. Humphrey was transported to Los Angeles. Then on February 22nd, 2024, he appeared in the LA Superior Court for the first time, where he entered a plea of not guilty to both charges. He was held there without bail, and a public defender was appointed to him. Maleesa's family was present outside of the courtroom, and her aunt told reporters, quote, "We are very pleased that an arrest was made. We're full of so many different emotions. We're very grateful and thankful that he was caught. Please continue to pray for our family. We just want justice for my niece, end quote. The family confirmed what they had said from the very beginning. They did not know Magnus Humphrey. They'd never even heard his name before it appeared on that arrest report, but thankfully, someone else did know who he was, and she's going to be playing a very important role at trial. This case has been moving very slowly, and I've actually been watching for updates for over 6 months on this one. A week-long preliminary hearing was held in October of 2025, more than 2 years after Maleesa's death. And at that hearing, the prosecution presented Kirsten Dossett, who testified about the introduction at the Santa Monica bar, the 5 days that she spent with Maleesa and Humphrey together, the shift in Maleesa's mood on September 7th, the text saying that she was scared and wanted him to leave, and Humphrey's possessiveness and controlling behavior. She also testified that she had never seen Maleesa get that close to a man before. A former girlfriend of Magnus Humphrey also testified, and she talked about a time where he attacked her in 2009 for over 3 hours. Humphrey whipped her, pulled her hair out, and he confined her. He threatened to kill her mother, and her dog if she ever called the police. She said this wasn't a fight. This was so much more than that. The prosecutors presented this because there seemed to be a pattern here. The same violence, like whipping, hair pulling, and confinement, was all documented on Maleesa's body. That is unbelievably disturbing. Medical examiner Dr. Bryce Hunt testified that Maleesa's cause of death was due to homicidal violence, likely caused by asphyxiation, and the LAPD forensic analysts and detectives testified about the physical evidence that had been collected from the apartment. Graphic photos were shown from inside of Unit 520, and the prosecutors confirmed that Maleesa's body had been bound with electrical cords and fabric from that cheetah print dress. This was all so heavy for Maleesa's family to hear and see. DNA evidence and video surveillance confirmed that Humphrey was present in the apartment and that he had intercourse with Maleesa. This was confirmed with that kit that I mentioned earlier. The deputy DA described the killing as a cold, calculated, premeditated act of violence and suggested that a dispute over money and possibly a misunderstanding about the nature of Maleesa's work may have been a precipitating factor that led to what happened here. But Humphrey's public defender, Michael Lambros, argued that the evidence was weak and that no one had actually witnessed the killing. Witnesses who saw Humphrey and Maleesa together had not seen him be physically aggressive towards her, and DNA and video evidence placing him at the scene did not prove that he committed the murder. He said that there was no evidence of premeditation or intent to cause suffering to her. On October 16, 2025, the judge ruled that sufficient evidence did exist for Magnus Daniel Humphrey to stand trial on both charges, and he currently remains in custody without bail. He's eligible for the death penalty under California law, but the LA District Attorney's Office has not said yet if they're planning to pursue capital punishment, at least at the time that I'm making this video. And like I mentioned earlier, I've been checking for updates on this case for months. Magnus Daniel Humphrey still has not been convicted, and he maintains that he's not guilty. Until justice comes, Maleesa Mooney's family has to process and sit with this grief that began on a September afternoon when a mother couldn't reach her child. No family should have to suffer this way, and no human being should suffer the way that Maleesa had to, with her entire life and future still ahead of her. Now her family has to move on without her, and we currently have no resolution or answers as to why, but I'm hopeful that justice is coming. I'm sending Maleesa and her family so much love as always, and I truly hope that justice will be served soon. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and for listening to Maleesa's story. My heart truly breaks for her and her family, and it's difficult to wrap my mind around this level of evil. Magnus Humphrey, allegedly, is a monster, and I'm going to be keeping my eye on what happens at trial. Thank you for being here and for showing so much love week after week. Talking to you guys every weekend in the comments is something I genuinely look forward to, so thank you again. Make sure to get some sunshine and take great care of yourselves this week, nurse's orders, and drop our secret handshake butterfly in the chat if you made it this far into today's video. I'll see you next weekend.